identified this bundle where these affidavits are, isn't it? And so that when you talk about an affidavit, then whoever reads knows in which bundle that affidavit is that you are referring to.
Mr. Ngoye, is it correct that the three affidavits are in what is marked PRASA Bundle E?
Yes, Chairperson.
So when we are referring to the affidavits, we will refer to Bundle E and the affidavits as Exhibit SS7.
That's correct.
Mr. Soni, are all the affidavits in here? I know about two.
The third one has been inserted this morning.
Has been inserted.
Yes.
The annexures, are they annexures to the first affidavit? Are they annexures to the second affidavit? Annexures to the third affidavit?
Chairperson, you will see in the index, the first affidavit has 15 annexures marked OMN 1 to 15.
Yes.
And then the second affidavit, which is marked B in the index, is from page 277 to 385 together with the annexures, and that has 10 annexures marked from MN1 to MN10. And then the third affidavit, which is called a supplementary affidavit, it is dated yesterday, the 15th of March. It has no annexures, and it appears at page 386 to 398.
Yes. Is each affidavit a separate exhibit?
It's not been marked as a separate exhibit, Chairperson. It's all marked Exhibit SS7.
I think they should be. I think they should be separate. I think the one that has got, the two that have got annexures, each should be a separate exhibit contained in the same bundle.
Yes.
And then with its annexures, so that there is no confusion.
Yes.
Because if we say Exhibit SS7 and you go to the first affidavit, you will think that that's all that SS7 is.
Yes.
And so it would cause confusion. I think we should then have SS7A, SS7B, SS7C.
That was what I was going to propose.
I think I will then say the affidavit of Ms. Martha Ngoye, deposed to on the 16th of September 2019, and its annexures will be admitted and marked as Exhibit SS7A. The next one is on what page?
Page 277, Chairperson.
277.
Yes. It's separated by a divider, which is marked
Yes,
B.
I have found it. The affidavit of Ms. Martha Ngoye, deposed to on the 17th of February 2020.
That is the one.
And that's the one that also has annexures.
That's
And its annexures will be admitted and will be marked as Exhibit SS7B.
B, yes.
And then where's the third one?
The other, C is at 386, Chairperson, of Bundle E.
Is it the one at 386?
That is so, Chairperson.
Okay. The affidavit of Ms. Martha Ngoye, deposed to on the 15th of March 2020, will be admitted and marked as Exhibit SS7C. Have we covered all of them?
Yes.
But your index did seem to indicate that there were 4 affidavits, if I'm not mistaken. At the end, let me check what I saw.
What the index seems to...
Yeah, that's what it shows.
Yes.
It says there's a supplementary affidavit at page 386 to 398, and then there's a supplementary affidavit at, then gives same pages. Yes. It's a duplication.
It is, yes.
Why can't people see these things and eliminate them? Yeah, okay, all right. You can continue.
Ms. Ngoye, you've read each of the affidavits you have made.
That's correct.
And the annexures to those affidavits.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Do you confirm in respect of each of the affidavits, that's SS7A, SS7B, and SS7C, that what is contained in the affidavits is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, Chairperson, I confirm that.
And to the extent that you refer to affidavits, to annexures, the annexures you refer to are those that are annexed to the to your affidavit.
That's correct.
Ms. Ngoye, just again, for the purposes of putting things in context, your affidavits together with the annexures deal with a whole range of matters.
That's correct, Chairperson.
I just want to say to you, following consultations we've had in relation to the evidence that you will give now, we've agreed that much of the details contained in the affidavits and the annexures might not be strictly relevant to the thrust of what the Commission is investigating, namely state capture.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And therefore, we will concentrate in your evidence on those matters directly implicated in state capture.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, if I stray, please bring me in line, and if you stray, you'll forgive me if I bring you in line. And I'm sure if both of us stray, the chairperson is going to bring us both in line. Okay, we can carry on that. Now, Mr. Ngoye, can I just again, to put things in context, the affidavit marked SS7A is an affidavit that deals with one specific matter, namely a mooted contract between PRASA and the DBSA worth about 4.7 billion rand.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And that's just one specific topic. The second affidavit deals with a range of matters. I'm going to go into that in a moment. But they all deal with the extent to which, in your experience, processes were followed so as to, or implemented so as to benefit certain beneficiaries.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And the third affidavit, that's SS7C, deals specifically with the Siangena court papers in which you made the founding affidavit that is before court now.
That's correct, Chairperson.
So, is it in order if we start with affidavit SS7B.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Chairperson, that is SS7, page 277. SS7B, page 277. Now, in this affidavit, you sketch out in the first few paragraphs your position at PRASA and the type of work you do, and in particular, the extent to which you are a safeguard to ensuring that PRASA remains within or acts strictly within the law.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Right, so let's start off with your position at PRASA.
Chairperson, currently I'm the Group Executive for Legal Risk and Compliance. So there's obviously quite a lot of work that one does, primarily advising the organization on legal matters, running litigations on behalf of the organization with the attorneys, drafting contracts as well for the organization, giving opinions where required, and in certain instances, we give those opinions where we believe they need to be given so that we can redirect the organization to make sure that we are compliant with what we do. So and I'm also responsible for the risk portfolio, looking at governance-related issues and compliance. And in a nutshell, that's basically what I do as a group executive, leading a team of other lawyers in the organization.
Now, one of the things that has come up before the Commission is the amount of litigation that PRASA has been involved in relating to different contracts that it signed. I'm sure there are other areas of litigation. You're aware of that?
I'm aware, Chairperson.
Can I ask how, when you look at it now, did that come about?
Just hang on, Ngoye. I'm going to adjourn so that all these movements that are happening here can be attended to without interrupting me.
As you please.
We adjourn.
All rise.
continue.
As you please, Chair.
Okay.
Ms. Ngoye, I had asked you about the amount of litigation, especially relating to procurement matters. And you were going to explain to the chairperson how you think this came about.
Chairperson, there is a lot of litigation within PRASA, and mainly that litigation, focuses around the contracts that PRASA would have concluded with a whole lot of suppliers. And when one looks at the issues at hand, one finds that, there is lack of compliance with processes within PRASA in many of these contracts. And we find that, we've had to review some of the contracts and take them to court so that the decisions to enter into those contracts can be, set aside. So in terms of the number of contracts that we have, I think PRASA is sued on a daily basis, and there's a lot of litigation that goes on. And Chairperson, perhaps it's also important for me to say, whilst we deal with this litigation, some people find that the assistance of the legal department is crucial, and they welcome it, and others regard us as a nuisance in the process. So, this is where we find ourselves, and we have to obviously rely on the business in defending the matters where PRASA is concerned.
Now, in regard to the major litigation that we have led evidence on or have brought to the notice of the chairperson, for example, the Swifambo contract, the Siangena contracts, the Siaya contracts, what role did legal play in drafting the contracts, advising how PRASA should deal with these?
Chairperson, in respect of the Swifambo agreement that has been set aside by the Concourt and the Supreme Court of Appeal, the legal function was not involved at all. This is a contract that was worth 3.5 billion rand. The organization felt it necessary to appoint somebody else outside and not involve the internal legal team in assisting with that contract. In fact, as far as Swifambo is concerned, what transpired was that there was a point where there was an intention to increase the value of the contract to 5 billion. And this is where, the legal department was approached. And on looking at the initial contract, we were obviously concerned as the department because we found a number of provisions which were not necessarily complied with. For instance, compliance with national treasury requirements, some of the conditions precedent were not followed, were not met. And when we raised these issues as far as the Swifambo contract was concerned, we were found to be in people's bad books. And what we said as the legal function, as far as that is concerned, is that we will not participate in a contract that we believe is untoward, and also where we make suggestions for changes to be made, those changes not being welcomed. So we made it very clear that rather do not involve the legal department because it was a late stage already for our involvement. And that's how it was. The Siangena contract as well, Chairperson, I guess I must start by saying I come to the legal department in September 2014. So these contracts had already been concluded. And my understanding is that even in those contracts, legal participation was very minimal. We get called in when there's problems with the contract. But in terms of drafting of those contracts and advising the organization, we've been excluded. The Prodigy Contract as well, that is also, been spoken of here. What we found is that, yes, again, we were not involved. And when we raised issues around the amendments that were required, as far as the contract is concerned, one could say hell broke loose within the organization. And The advice that we had given also at the time, considering the fact that processes were not followed, we looked at that and said we can't obviously perpetuate this type of behavior. And I remember that the memo that we drafted for the Group CEO at the time was to say, look, this process was not necessarily followed properly, and that we don't believe that the amendment should be made. But, you know, that decision was seen as legal, being contrary to what people want to do as far as the organization was concerned, and it really didn't sit well within the organization.
In fact, as you detail later in your affidavit, your refusal or reluctance to involve yourself in this reform and prodigy matters is what led to Mr. Dingiswayo's dismissal and then the day after your dismissal.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Well, it's going to be important to mention people's names as to who did what, who ignored what, so that we have a complete picture as opposed to just generalizations. If a memo was addressed to a specific person saying this is the advice and that person ignored it, let me know who that person is, who the memo was from, who was it to, and what did the memo say, and what was the response. Okay?
Now, we will come to those details in a moment, Ms. Ngoye. But you, in paragraph 9 of your affidavit, talk about the period when Mr. Lucky Montana was the CEO, and you say that PRASA was racked with maladministration and corruption. Would that be correct? That's what you said.
Yes, that's correct, Chairperson.
What is the position now?
Chairperson, the more things change at PRASA, the more they stay the same. Mr. Montana left in 2015, and what we found is that from that period onwards, you know, things have not necessarily changed to what we would have wanted them to be. And I do reflect on that in my affidavit, because it's very clear that issues around maladministration within PRASA continue.
Mr. Soni, I prefer that we start where we should start.
Yes.
And go up to the end.
Yes.
For example, this part obviously belongs to the end.
Yes.
So for me, it doesn't, I don't need it to be told about it now,
Yes.
only in general terms, and later on the details. I want to get it all in one place in the story. So I prefer that we start somewhere, we go up to the end, and where we deal with an issue, I get all the details that I need to get at that time.
Yes.
Because otherwise, when I read the transcript, I hear about these generalities, I want details,
Yes.
and then I don't know that I'll get the details later.
Yes.
So I suggest we just start from beginning and we deal with issues as a whole and complete, and then move on to the others up to the end. So in other words, I will want to know if there's been no change, but I want that at the end. At this stage, I want you to talk to me about 2014, 2015, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, as you please. Now, the first substantive matter you deal with in your affidavit, Ms. Ngoye, is the influence of Mr. Roy Moodley at PRASA.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And you start that issue at paragraph 14 of your affidavit.
That's correct, Chairperson.
So would you tell the chairperson how it came about that you became aware of Mr. Moodley's influence? And as the chairperson has pointed out, one wants particulars about who the individuals were, who the entities were, and whose notice were certain matters brought in relation to concerns that you raised?
Chairperson, my first encounter effectively with the name Roy Moodley was in relation to a contract, an advertising contract with a party called Strawberry Works. Now, I had no knowledge of who Mr. Moodley was at the time, and this contract was concluded at the time I was the CEO of Intersight. So in terms of PRASA's mandate, Intersight is responsible for leveraging on PRASA's property portfolio so that it can support the rail business. This contract was entered into around about 2011, 2012. And the gist of the contract really was the provision of advertising for PRASA in relation to our various stations. Now, I come to know of Mr. Moodley when I was summoned to a meeting. What I understood from Mr. Tiro Holele was that the group CEO at the time, Mr. Lucky Montana, had requested that Mr. Holele call this meeting with the parties from Siangena, Strawberry Works, so that a whole lot of issues can be ironed out. I welcomed the meeting because we at Intersight were running with the transaction, and I didn't see anything untoward. And at the end of the day, I think one can safely say that we didn't benefit one supplier to the other. There are quite a number of players within the advertising portfolio. So for me, it was Strawberry Works. You've got your part of the contract. You will deal with your part of the contract and obviously account accordingly where PRASA is concerned. But I guess it was not to be, because in this particular meeting, where I was called, Mr. Holele came with Mr. Maraj, who later on I do say, Chairperson, Mr. Maraj is the attorney for Strawberry Works. There was Mr. Salvan Moodley, who I later understood to be Mr. Roy Moodley's son. And there was a Mr. Ajvir. I just don't know how to pronounce his surname, Chairperson, but it's in
give
the
the spelling.
It's that, you look at paragraph 15.4, Ms. Ngoye.
It's Dwaika Pasadar.
Okay.
It's
Dr. Passat, huh?
yes.
Is that the one?
That's one.
Okay, Dr.
Right.
Passat. I could be completely mispronouncing it.
Yes.
So,
Dwark Pasad.
eh?
Dwark Pasad.
Dwak Passat.
Yes.
Okay, all right. We must try and pronounce it the way it should be pronounced. Okay.
Chap-
Sorry, I just, so that we have the timelines, you at that time were at the CEO of Intersight. Could you tell the chairperson between what period and what period you were the chairperson?
Chairperson, I was the CEO of Intersight from August of 2011 till August of 2014. So I occupied that role during that period.
And as the CEO, what would your powers and your duties be in relation to contracts that Intersight had concluded with different contracts?
So I think at the time, Intersight had the benefit of me being an attorney as well, that I could look at the contracts that were entered into and advise accordingly on what needs to happen as far as those contracts are concerned. So even though I was the CEO, I did manage really and work together with the commercial unit within Intersight on making sure that, as an example, this particular contract is managed properly and we account properly where PRASA is concerned. So over and above all the other work that I had to do from a strategic perspective, I played a huge role as far as legal matters were concerned within Intersight.
I'm sorry.
Just again, Intersight was one of two subsidiaries of PRASA, is that
That's
right?
correct, Chairperson.
Yes, and the contract that you were talking about for advertising was a contract between PRASA, involving PRASA or involving Intersight?
No, Chair. The contract was with Intersight. What had transpired is that part of the mandate of Intersight coming from PRASA was that Intersight would enter into certain contracts on behalf of PRASA. And this was, for revenue generation purposes where Intersight was concerned. And also in line with the mandate that PRASA had given Intersight of leveraging over, PRASA's property portfolio and making money, because at the end of the day, we would account to the group in terms of the revenue that we were making.
I was told last week of advertising on PRASA property. Is that what you're talking about?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yeah, okay.
Now, in relation to the Strawberry Works contract, it was between whom and whom?
The Strawberry Work contract, Chairperson, was between Intersight and Strawberry Works.
And was the contract in existence at the time you were appointed CEO?
No, the contract was not yet in existence. In fact, as far as the advertising portfolio was concerned, Chairperson, we had the contract been awarded to a company called Umjanji Consortium. And what had been agreed at the time was that some portions of the contract would be ceded to other suppliers. So a portion of that particular contract was then ceded to Strawberry Works, and the Strawberry Works contract really was finalized around about 2012.
And you were part of that process which Strawberry Works became involved in what Umjanji had ceded?
That's correct, Chairperson.
And there was, on your understanding, there was nothing improper about that?
Well, Chair, I suppose being a legal person, you look at the procurement procedure, and you become concerned with when somebody speaks about sessions of a procurement process. And the concern that one had was that we could be challenged out there, because clearly that was not the aim. You couldn't just enter into an agreement with a party and then cede off portions of it to other people who had not necessarily been successful in the tender. But this is what transpired in this case. And the decision for the session.
A session would defeat the whole purpose
That's
of procurement.
correct. That's correct, Chairperson. So in this regard, when the instruction came to say we need to cede this contract, the instruction came from the board of Intersight at the time. And the chairperson of the board of Intersight at the time was Mr. Lucky Montana. So effectively, that instruction was carried through. But the concerns were raised around, ceding contracts following a procurement process.
The instruction was to do what? To cede?
To cede, yes.
The rights to cede, whose rights to whom?
Well, because Umjanji, Chairperson, Consortium, had been the successful bidder, so it was basically taking away from Umjanji and giving to Strawberry Works. So there had to be a consent coming from Umjanji to say, yes, I consent to the cession of that portion of the advertising portfolio to Strawberry Works.
So there was in existence a contract between Intersight and Umjanji.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And that was for advertisements to be done on PRASA properties.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And that had been in existence from when, that contract?
From 2011.
From 2011.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And as far as you know, it too had been implemented over the years.
Yes,
Yes.
Chairperson.
And then this is now 2014, 2015?
This is now 2012, 2013.
And when the instruction comes to say there should be a cession from Umjanji to Strawberry Works. When is that? When was that instruction?
It was around 2012.
It was
Chairperson.
around 2012.
That's correct.
Oh, okay, all right. And basically, it sought to, the instruction sought to make sure that whatever benefits would have been given to, would have been obtained by Umjanji, would now go to Strawberry Works.
That's correct, Chairperson.
So this instruction came about a year or so after the contract had been concluded between Umjanji and Intersite.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay, all right, thank you.
Now, when the instruction came from the Intersite board, and you say Mr. Montana was chairperson, and I don't think there's any dispute that the CEO of PRASA was the chairperson of the boards of Intersite and AutoCAD. When that instruction came, were any concerns raised by you or by your legal team at Intersite?
Chairperson, as I indicated, the concerns were raised. I mean, I remember being one of the people that raised the concern of a session between, parties in light of the procurement process that I understood had been, undertaken. So I definitely raised the issues around the session as a concern. But, I guess one is overruled, and this is basically what happened. The session proceeded, and we entered into a contract with Strawberry Works.
Now, this instruction, did it come to you in a board meeting of Intersite, or was it given to you outside of the board meeting? So when it was given for the first time?
It was given by the board.
It was given by the board?
Yes, it was given by the board because from an
Yes.
authority perspective, they
Yes.
had to authorize me to then
Okay.
sign that contract. So it came from the board of Intersite at the time.
Yes. Now, the advertisement agreements, did they not entail that whoever had a contract with Intersite in this regard would obtain clients who want advertisements to be placed on certain properties of PRASA, and that entity would put those advertisements, and then the clients would pay that entity, and that entity would then pay some money to Intersite or PRASA. Is that not what was involved?
That's correct, Chairperson. In fact, in terms of the contract, there was a 60-40 split
Yes.
of the revenue. So
Yes.
where PRASA, for instance, gave capex, for instance, in relation to particular structures, which would be used for advertising purposes, then PRASA would get 60% of the revenue coming back, and vice versa, Chairperson, where, for instance, any of the other, advertising companies invested their monies in respect of the advertising portfolio, the reverse would apply, where 60% of the revenue would then go to them, and then the 40% would then be accounted for, where Intersite was concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Now, when you raised your concerns about the session, I take it one of your concerns was that this could, the award could be challenged on the basis, as you said, that that's not what the purpose of awarding a tender is.
That's correct, Chairperson. In fact, that whole advertising contract was a subject of litigation. We were challenged, primarily by Prime Media, who believed that the process that was followed was not proper. So, it was inevitable that doing the session as well, would compound the issues where we are concerned.
So is the position that in 2011, when that contract was concluded between Intersite and Umjanji, procurement process, it had not been fully complied with there as well, and that when an instruction to effect a session was given, that too, you pointed out to the board, would defeat the purpose of procurement.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
Now, in regard to the prime media matter, Ms. Ngoye, you referred to it in paragraph 15.5 of your affidavit. That's SS7B. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, what was Prime Media's, if you can recall, what was their main complaints when they challenged this award?
Chairperson, at the time of the tender process, there was a company by the name of Provantage that was part of, the companies that had bid for the advertising portfolio. Now, what transpired after the completion of the tender process was that Provantage then, entered into an agreement with another company, and they formed the consortium of Umjanji. Now, clearly, that as well, from a procurement perspective, cannot be correct, because I do recall that when the approval was sought from the group CEO, Mr. Montana, that Provantage was the successful winner, he indicated that he's not happy about the BEE component of Provantage. And then the consortium was then formed, which was then called Umjanji. Now, when Prime Media challenges this whole tender process, it also challenges it on the basis that the party that had tendered was Provantage and not Umjanji Consortium, as had been the case after the award of the contract. And so those were some of the issues that Provantage had raised as a concern for them, to say this process was flawed because the parties that participated in the tender process were then really, at the end of the day, disregarded if one could just simply form, separate entities outside the procurement process.
Now, when you say that Prime Media challenged the award, was it through a court application?
That's correct, Chairperson. In fact, the matter has still not been finalized.
Why after so long?
It's a complex issue, Chairperson. I mean, it's been an issue where, for instance, with the involvement also of Strawberry Works fighting for their rights, there were quite a number of companies. In fact, there were 3 companies where Umjanji had to cede their rights to. So we had Umjanji, we had a company called Siatembana, and then we had a company called Strawberry Works. So in dealing with this matter, we found that each party then wanted to be represented, wanted to take part in the litigation, and that's why it prolonged. But also, Chairperson, one must mention that we had a challenge internally with the lawyers that were assisting us at the time. We had briefed Hogan Lovells, for instance, to assist us with this particular matter. But, during the running of the matter, it was felt that Hogan Lovells was not doing its work, and it was criticized extensively. And we were instructed, rather, to appoint another law firm to deal with the matter. So, the stop and start is also,
Yes.
what frustrated the process.
When you say it was felt, who felt that way?
Mr. Montana, for instance, I received a call from Mr. Montana to say, hey, Martha, you need to change lawyers. And I was like, but why? Because the lawyers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. No, they're not defending the interests of PRASA properly. I didn't agree with it, Chairperson, because I was instrumentally involved in the running of that matter. So I knew what was at stake. And when that instruction came, I refused to carry it out. I said to Mr. Montana, in any event, the company that you want us to brief is not even on our panel. You know, that's an issue for me. And also, what is going to happen to all the costs that we've already incurred in the work that Hogan Lovells had done in briefing a new firm? So I just wasn't comfortable with doing that, and I just decided not to heed the call. And I left it at that.
If you look at paragraph 15.6 of your affidavit, Ms. Ngoye, you raise another matter concerning expenditure or the nature of the expenditure that changing lawyers would entail. The first sentence of paragraph 15.6.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And would you tell the chairperson what that was?
Chairperson, it was precisely around, you know, the changing of lawyers midstream. And
Maybe before you proceed, you should tell me, because I see it in your affidavit at paragraph 15.5, what firm Mr. Montana wanted to be instructed. And
there was a firm called BBM Attorneys. I don't know what the acronym stands for, Chairperson, but they call themselves BBM Attorneys. And we were supposed to then just take the matter to BBM for them to run with it.
were they on PRASA's panel of attorneys?
No, Chairperson, they were not.
What was the position about the law firms that were on PRASA's panel of attorneys? Was the position that when PRASA instructs attorneys, it had to confine itself to those attorneys who were on the panel all the time, or was the position that in certain circumstances, attorneys who were not on the panel could be briefed by PRASA? And if so, what would be those circumstances?
Chairperson, it was very clear within PRASA that if a law firm is not on the panel, it cannot be briefed. I mean, this was also making sure that, you know, when the AG comes, the Auditor General comes and audits the organization, we can then produce a list of attorneys, and they can obviously look at who we have briefed. So it was a known fact within PRASA that unless a law firm is on the panel of PRASA, it cannot be briefed. And that was the position. You know, the reality was that we did not want to fall foul of those processes as well, and our policies internally, when we made sure that we only stick with those companies that are on the panel.
What was this position part of PRASA policy that's written down and existed somewhere?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, and it was clear.
Yes, it was very clear, Chair.
Yes. Okay, all right. Yes, you may continue.
In fact, just to move to a related but different point, when Werksman was appointed to do the investigation, the AG raised the question that that was an irregular appointment because they were not on the list of PRASA's attorneys. Is that not correct?
Well, I guess the AG raised it. Werksman's was on our panel. Let me start by saying that. So they were on our panel. But the issues that the AG had raised were primarily around the type of work that Werksman's was undertaking for the organization, and they felt that at the time, PRASA ought to have gone out on tender because this was an investigation, really, at the end of the day, and that's where the challenge was. But at the end of the day, Werksman's had been on PRASA's panel where the decision was taken to work with Werksman's. So there was different appreciation or understanding, Chairperson, between what was really required and what had been done by the board in the appointment of Werksman's.
Before any law firm could be placed on PRASA's panel, I take it that there was some accreditation process that would be undertaken by PRASA. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson. The panel comprised of those firms that would have
they had to meet certain criteria.
That's it.
Is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
And they would bid to be on the panel.
Yes, yes, Chairperson.
Now, just so that we are not at cross purposes at some later stage. You talk about a PRASA panel of attorneys, but you indicated that this was a contract, the Strawberry Works contract was between Intersight and Strawberry Works. Was the panel that Intersight used the same as PRASA's panel?
Yes, Chair. In fact, how it works within PRASA, the group, is that the legal function is centralized. So the legal function sits at head office as a support function. So all the subsidiaries of PRASA would then go to the legal function to ask for assistance there. The budget of that work would sit in the corporate function with the legal department. So none of the subsidiaries had a budget for legal work.
Now, to return to the instruction that you must disappoint Hogan Lovells and appoint BBM, what happened to that instruction?
Well, Chair, as I indicated, I didn't understand the rationale for the instruction from Mr. Montana, but it was a serious issue, and one can safely say that we were really under strain to justify why we should not be using BBM. You know, one would have thought that it is what it is at the end of the day, where you have a law firm that's not even on the panel, and there's insistence that we give it work. And at the end of the day, we were also looking at the monies that the organization had spent with Hogan Lovells. So it just didn't make sense to us that we just move this on instruction because somebody there says Hogan Lovells is not representing and looking out for the interests of PRASA accordingly. So, you know, it was just one of those things that we just were not comfortable doing.
Well, is Mr. Montana a lawyer?
Not that I know of, Chair.
Yes.
No, your answer is either yes or no.
Okay, he's not a lawyer, Chair.
But of course, if you don't know, you can't say he's
I
not.
don't. Well, that's the other thing, Chair.
If you don't know whether he is or is not, then you can tell me you don't know whether he is or not.
Well, I don't know if he is, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Did you say to him, but Mr. Montana, how can you say we must instruct a law firm that's not on our panel? You know what the policy position is. And if you did, what did he say to them?
Yes, Chair. Mr. Montana was advised, you know, that it's just not possible. I wanted to find out really what the rationale is for this request from him. And
Did he say?
And his explanation was no. Hogan Lovells is not looking out for the interests of PRASA. We need to move this to another law firm.
Well, that might explain moving the work from
Hogan Lovells.
Hogan Lovells, but it can't explain why a firm that's not on the panel should be the one to which the work must be moved. So did he give you an answer as to why a firm that was not on the panel of PRASA should be used?
There was no explanation, Chair.
Yes.
We were just told, move it to this law firm,
Yes.
and that's it.
Now, with regard to Hogan Lovells, with regard to them, did he give you details as to what it is that he said they had not done well?
It was a general statement, Chairperson. It was very general about
That they were
protecting,
not-
the interests
not
of PRASA.
protecting
They're not
PRASA.
doing well. And that was not sufficient.
But you as the head of the legal department, you were satisfied with the work of that firm?
Yes, that's correct, Chairperson.
You had no problems?
No, not at
Okay,
all.
thank you.
Yes, please. Now, eventually, though, what was the solution devised by Mr. Montana to ensure that Hogan Lovells was removed. You wouldn't act on that instruction, as I understand it.
Mr. Soni, I think we should put the question differently. We haven't heard from the witness whether any scheme was devised. What did Mr. Montana do when you refused to remove the work from Hogan Lovells to BBM?
Well, Chair, I can safely say that Mr. Montana was not happy. And I spoke earlier of a meeting that I was summoned to with the representatives of Strawberry Works. Now, for me, it was very clear because really at that meeting, those representatives of Strawberry Works that were there had come to tell me as well to move Hogan Lovells as the attorneys for PRASA. And in fact, what I was told was that they would make sure that the advertising portfolio is moved from Intersight and is going to be run at corporate. So, at the end of the day, what also transpired was that Mr. Montana, he had not communicated to me really what he was going to do, but I just saw, issues unfold. For instance, I was, at Intersight, and the next thing I knew, Chairperson, was that Mr. Montana's special legal advisor, he had a special legal advisor by the name of Malini Naidu, came to the offices of Intersight and started removing the files. Removing the files.
Removing the files.
The files in relation to the advertising portfolio.
Yes.
Obviously, I found that very strange. And when I inquired as to, where the instructions come from, I received a very hostile response from Ms. Naidu, who, for instance, told me that she was an officer of the court. She's here to remove the files. She was instructed by Mr. Lucky Montana to do so, and found it, rather amazing that I was refusing to release the file and started accusing me of corruption right there. Her words were, "What is it that you're hiding, that you don't want these files to be removed?" Remember, at the time, there was no instructions from Mr. Montana to say, "Look, I am going to remove these files from Intersight." It just happened like that. That people just came in, led by Ms. Malini Naidu, who was Mr. Montana's special advisor, to just come and remove the files.
Did she say she was doing so on Mr. Montana's instructions?
Yes, Chair. She told me that. In fact, her attitude was, "You can ask whoever you want." But Mr. Montana is the one that said we must come and remove these files.
How long after your discussion with Mr. Montana did this happen?
It was about 2-3 months after, Chair.
Yes.
That there was this rash move.
And in the interim, during that 3 or so months, he had not come back to you to say, "Look, I heard what you say, but I am going to instruct people to come and remove the files"?
No, he hadn't, Chair. In fact, when that happened, I phoned Mr. Montana to want to know what is going on, but I didn't find him. So I then phoned, we had a lead independent director, because Mr. Montana was the group CEO and chairperson as well of Intersight. And when I phoned Mr. Benny Bushielo, and I said, "Dr. Bushielo, what is going on? I am not advised of this instruction. The mandate of advertising from the PRASA board sits with Intersight, and there is no resolution that I know of that removes that portfolio from Intersight back to corporate. What is going on?" And Mr. Bushielo was puzzled. He didn't know what was going on. And he indicated to me that he will find out from Mr. Montana. But effectively, Chair, that's what transpired. And when I met Mr. Montana the following day, I effectively said to him, "But Mr. Montana, how can you send people to come and attack me?" I remember, that's exactly what I said. To come and attack me, and I report directly to you. in terms of the structure. Why is it that you did not tell me that you are sending people to Intersite to come and remove the files? You could have told me. I even said to him, so I must just be aware because maybe people will come in and attack me and I wouldn't know about it. Mr. Montana said, well, you didn't know anything about it. You didn't know anything about the removals of those files. You didn't instruct anybody. And then I requested that we then schedule a meeting, with the individuals that had come and represented that he was the one that instructed them. But that meeting took a different form, Chairperson.
Well, maybe you need to tell us that different, because that's part of the removal of the files and what happened to them.
Sure.
Yes.
Chair, we met, in that meeting was Mr. Montana, myself, Mr. Tiro Halele. Mr. Tiro Halele was the strategy officer in the office of the group CEO. Then we had Ms. Malini Naidu, the advisor, special advisor to Mr. Montana. Then we had the late Hope Zinde. Ms. Zinde was responsible for the corporate affairs portfolio within the organization. Now, I went there wanting really to find out how Mr. Montana could then, have given this instruction and then come back and say he didn't. And I thought that, Mr. Montana would reprimand the people that just basically came to Intersite and removed the files. It didn't happen like that. In fact, within minutes of that meeting, Mr. Montana's words were, you see, if you guys had listened to what I had said to you, we would not be sitting here. And
if you guys had listened to
what he had said to us
Yeah.
about the advertising portfolio, and
the guys here, the reference to the guys here being a reference to who?
to Mr. Holele and myself.
Okay.
Mr. Lindikaya Zide, who was the company secretary at the time, also, knew about the instruction to remove the files. So Mr. Montana effectively said to us, we wouldn't be sitting here if you people, referring to the three of us, had listened to what I said. And therefore, he wants these files to be removed. So we didn't deal in that meeting with the fact that he had said he didn't authorize the removal of those files. In fact, there were lots of accusations that were leveled against me by Ms. Malini Naidu in the presence of Mr. Montana, accusing me of corruption, accusing me of maladministration. And at the end I said to Mr. Montana, well, if that's the case, then suspend me so that you can conduct your investigations. But I don't agree with what is being said. And the issue here was about the removal of the files and the instruction that you had given. So clearly now you're going against the word that you had told me, that you had no knowledge of this instruction. And now it appears that you are clearly supporting what was done. The meeting was a horrible meeting, Chairperson. In fact, in that meeting, what Mr. Montana decided was there was a Mr. Martin Chauke who was responsible for running the advertising portfolio within Intersite. An instruction was given to say, call Mr. Chauke and suspend him and tell him to bring, process equipment. This was around 10 o'clock at night, Chairperson. And we had to do that. And I was very clear I wasn't going to suspend Mr. Chauke because I just didn't agree with how, things were done. And Ms. Hope Zinde, together with Ms. Malini Naidu, then decided to draft the letter and to suspend Mr. Martin Chauke. So we had to call Mr. Chauke into the office, and he arrived around about 11 o'clock at night to be told that he's been suspended and that the portfolio in any event has moved to the corporate function. And I must state, Chairperson, that the issue around the governance processes of that removal were also a concern, because what we had said is that give us then a resolution from the PRASA board that directs that we need to do this. It never came, so that's how things were.
So you didn't get Mr. Montana didn't say at that meeting, I had not given instructions in the past that the files be removed as such, but his utterances at the meeting suggested to you that he had actually given the instruction. Is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes.
In fact, what-
Certainly at the meeting, he was fully in support of the removal of the files.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. Okay.
Listen, I see it's 11:15, and at the risk of,
Yes.
there are a number of issues that arise that I want to just tie up
Yes.
things so that
Yes.
I could show you in the affidavit where these matters appear.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's deal with them after the tea break.
Yes.
Let's take the tea break. We'll resume at past. We adjourn.
all rise.
let's proceed. Give your mic, and your voice.
Mr. Ngoye, the evidence you've given just before we broke, would I be correct that it's all set out in paragraph 15, which has 17 subparagraphs to it?
That's correct, Chairperson.
This is of your affidavit called SS7B.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, just to tie up a few small points. The effect of, what was the effect of that meeting in regard to where the portfolio, the advertising portfolio concerning Strawberry Walks was?
It had moved to the corporate function of PRASA.
Did that mean that interstate would have nothing to do with it? Or did it mean that interstate would still have something to do with it, but you as CEO, maybe in your team at Intersite would not have anything to do with it?
No, Chair. It was very clear. It was removed altogether from Intersite. So effectively, all of us at Intersite would have nothing to do with that portfolio.
But Intersite would remain a party to that agreement.
That's correct, Chairperson.
But the management at site would have no role to play.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
Thank you. Then the next question is...
I'm sorry, Mr.
Oh,
Sonia. I'm
sorry.
terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. Did that mean that different people would be the people to instruct attorneys?
That's correct, Chairperson. In fact,
Yes.
that's what happened.
That's what happened.
Yes.
Okay, all right. At that time, you were at Intersite and not in the legal department of PRASA. But once it was these files were at corporate services, did that mean that they would therefore fall under the legal department of PRASA, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, Chairperson. In fact, they were run from the office of Mr. Lucky Montana, the group CEO.
Yes.
His special advisor, Ms. Malini Naidu,
Yes.
became the person that ran with the process.
Yes. This might just be something as an aside. Did you say Ms. Naidu was a legal advisor to Mr. Montana?
That's correct, Chairperson. Special legal advisor.
Special legal advisor.
That's correct, Chairperson.
You may or may not be able to answer this. Would there have been a need for a special legal advisor to the group CEO for PRASA in circumstances where PRASA had a legal department which was supposed to provide legal advice to PRASA, and I would imagine including the group CEO?
Well, I didn't think so, Chairperson, because as the group executive, responsible for legal, one would have thought that there was no need for a special legal advisor for Mr. Montana, but, these things, I suppose.
Do you know whether there was provision in the instruments of PRASA, policies or organogram or whatever that made space for the appointment of a special legal advisor to the group CEO?
No, Chair, there wasn't any.
There wasn't any?
No.
Okay.
Now, in regard to, well, if I could just follow up from what the chairperson has asked. You are the head of legal now at PRASA. You've been since 2014, August 2014.
That's correct, Chairperson.
How many lawyers, including yourself, work in your department?
Well, now the number has dwindled, Chairperson. I think now there's 4 legal advisors left, but we were at one point 7 legal advisors that were part of the team.
And at the time of this incident, when the portfolio was taken from you, from Interside, how many legal advisors were there at PRASA's head office?
There were roughly 5, 6, Chairperson.
And in your view, did they have the necessary experience to deal with all matters concerning PRASA and perhaps the
Yes, Chairperson, I believe that. All of them, in fact, are admitted attorneys. So,
When these files were at Interside, when you were still the CEO of Interside, were they being handled with the guidance of the legal department of PRASA?
no, Chair.
Uh-huh.
They were in the office of the Group CEO, Mr. Montana. And
Yeah,
because,
I mean, before they were removed from Interside, that's what I'm talking about.
yes, yes, Chair.
Where before they were removed from Interside,
Yes.
were they being handled with the guidance of the legal department of PRASA?
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, but you say after they were removed from Interside, that changed.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Okay.
Now, in your affidavit, SS7B, at paragraph 15.4, you referred, this is a meeting to which you referred earlier. One of the people whom you name as being at the meeting is Mr. Mirage. Do you see that?
That's correct, Chairperson.
And then if you look at 15.6, you say the last attorneys who handled the matter was Mirage Attorneys. Is there a relationship between Mirage Attorneys and Mr. Mirage?
It was one and the same person, Chairperson.
And besides now acting for PRASA, whom were Mirage Attorneys acting for in the dispute with Prime Media?
Chairperson, effectively, they were acting for both PRASA and Strawberry Works.
So let's get this right. As at the time when the files were removed from PRASA, from Interside, the attorneys being used by Interside stroke PRASA were Hogan Lovers.
That's correct, Chair.
Once the files were removed and placed at corporate services at PRASA, where the attorneys dealing with the matter on behalf of Interside stroke PRASA changed.
Yes, Chair. In fact, Hogan Lovells was removed from the brief.
Yes.
Yes.
And who was instructed to handle the matter on behalf of Interside stroke PRASA?
Mr. Maraj.
Mr. Maraj Attorneys.
Maraj Attorneys. Yes.
And you say Maraj Attorneys was also acting for Strawberry Works.
That's correct, Chair.
And at the time that the matter was still being handled by Interside before the removal of the files, was Maraj during that time acting for Strawberry Works?
That's correct, Chair.
Strawberry Works alone in this dispute, but later on he acted for both Strawberry Works and Interside stroke PRASA.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
Now, much earlier, Ms. Ngoye, you said that this dispute is still ongoing. You
That's
recall
correct,
saying-
Chairperson.
Who acts for PRASA at present in that dispute?
Hogan Lovells acts for PRASA, Chairperson.
And for Strawberry Works?
I think it is still Mr. Maraj. I could be wrong, Chairperson, but we removed the instructions from Mr. Maraj because of the conflict, obviously, that was there. And we took the matters back to Hogan Lovells, and they continue to run.
Well, we haven't got there. So at the time you are at Intersight, Mirage attorneys are acting for both PRASA and Strawberry Works.
That's correct, Chairperson.
When did you put an end to Mirage or when did Mirage attorneys' instructions to appear to represent PRASA end?
I think it was 2 months within my arrival within the legal function, where myself, together with the general manager, Mr. Dingiswayo, agreed that we could not have a situation where an attorney for a supplier is also acting for PRASA, and also we were not seeing traction as far as this matter was concerned, and we believed that we needed to give them notice to say they are terminated. And also, Chairperson, I must state that Maraj was also not on PRASA's panel at the time that they were instructed. So, we had to deal with all those issues just to bring some semblance of order within the legal function.
Okay. Just to complete that part of the picture, as I understand it, when the matter was taken from Intersight, Ms. Malini Naidu was effectively the legal advisor for PRASA in relation to that matter.
That's correct, Chairperson.
When you got to PRASA head office in August 2014, you then removed Mirage attorneys as PRASA's instructed attorney.
That's correct, Chairperson.
At that stage, where was the file, the Strawberry Works file, in terms of the legal part?
The files had been at the corporate function. The files were also with Mr. Maraj. So we naturally had to pay Mr. Maraj to get our files back, because obviously he would not release the files until his fees were paid. So that's what we needed to do, and that's what we did.
Is that the condition he put to returning the files to you?
Yes.
Now, in regard to Mr. Chauke, he is suddenly suspended. Was any reason given to him, to your knowledge, for why he was suspended?
His letter said it was insubordination, Chairperson. So,
What were the details of the alleged insubordination,
the fact
as you understood them?
Yes, the fact that he was, what Mr. Martin Chauke was actually accused of was working with a supplier to the detriment of PRASA. And effectively what had happened at the time, Chairperson, was that both Ms. Malini Naidu as well as the late Ms. Hope Zinde had not understood, because they had just come into the process, not long. They had misunderstood the communication between Mr. Chauke and one of the service provider, where he insisted that certain things were supposed to be done in a particular way as far as the contract was concerned, because he was managing that contract. So they took that correspondence to mean that Mr. Chauke was working against PRASA and conniving with Prime Provantage. So, it just didn't make sense. And when I, in that meeting with Mr. Montana, tried to explain that, it became an issue of saying, no, well, that's not how things were. And because the meeting was so tense, you then could not even, find a way of saying, let's step back and really understand what it is that we are. He must be removed. suspended for a period of about 2 years, Chairperson, without being charged.
And was
That was when you were in terms of years 2015, 2014.
It was 2014, so he came back in 2016.
You don't remember the month for when the suspension started?
It
It was the end of the year.
It was not the end of the year. It was around June, I think, of 2013.
Yes.
Yes.
Of 2018.
Yes. It was 2013 when Mr. Martin Ngoye was asked to leave. So the whole of 2014, 2015, he wasn't at work. He only came back in 2016.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was over 2 years effectively.
Yeah. And do you know why no charges were brought for so long?
Well, Chairperson, I guess for me, it was very clear that there were no charges. People could not, put the charges together, in fact, he was like a forgotten soul. He's out there, and therefore it doesn't matter anymore, because the expectation that one would have had is that, if you're accusing somebody of that, you would immediately prepare the charges, but it was not done.
Yes, thank you.
Now, at paragraph 15.17 of SAB, that's this affidavit we are dealing with, you say that what you have narrated is being done to show the power of Mr. Roy, or the influence of Mr. Roy Moodley at PRASA.
That's correct, Chair. Chair, you'll recall I had indicated that I did not know Mr. Moodley. So, but when I then got to understand what was happening within Intersite with this advertising portfolio and the instructions that were given, it really became clear to me that Mr. Moodley was very powerful, because what I was told at the meeting was we are going to remove these files. We're going to remove this portfolio from Intersite, and it happened. So to me, it was very clear that, wow, we've got somebody who's clearly very powerful, who can give those instructions, and they carried out.
Now, why do you connect Mr. Moodley, Roy Moodley, with Strawberry Walks?
His son, Chairperson, Salvin Moodley, was really instrumental in running that portfolio. So he managed that portfolio, and that relationship, obviously father and son, for me was very clear that even though Mr. Moodley was not involved, the son was involved.
Was Strawberry Wax Mr. Roy Moodley's son's company, as it were?
Yes. Yes, Chairperson.
Okay.
And you say that on the basis of what?
Well, Chairperson, I was made to understand that that is the case, where Strawberry Works was really, I think he was one of the directors at Strawberry Works. And so, it followed.
And in your
Did you ever see correspondence from Strawberry Works that maybe was signed by him or anything like that?
In most instances, the correspondence from Strawberry Works was signed by Mr. Ajvir. So he would be the one that does a lot of the letters to PRASA Intersite. But
Yes.
the company document had Mr. Salvin Moodley as a
Yes.
director in the company.
So Mr. Roy Moodley's son was reflected as one of the directors in the correspondence?
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay.
And just finally, on that issue, when you were managing the Strawberry Works portfolio as the CEO of Intersite, did you have interactions with Mr. Salvin Moodley?
Yes, I did, Chair. It was in that meeting where I was constantly told that I don't know what I'm doing. And I was told that I needed, in fact, I was given instructions of how to run the portfolio, and obviously I wasn't going to take that. And one thing I made perfectly clear to Mr. Moodley and the team that had come to him, with him to the meeting, was that I don't report to you. I report to the Board of Intersight. So I'm not sure why it is that you can have so much, confidence in the meeting to tell me how to run the function. I took exception to it, Chairperson.
And what was his reaction to that?
Well, Chairperson, I guess for me, the reaction was, well, we'll see what will happen, what will prevail. Because immediately after that, we left the meeting, and this whole noise around Strawberry Works and the lawyers intensified, coming from Mr. Montana. So for me, it became very clear that they clearly went back to report, back to Mr. Montana and insisted on how things should be done. And finally, their wishes were met.
The next issue that you deal with in your affidavit, Ms. Ngoye, is your interactions and perhaps relationship with Mr. Lucky Montana, and you deal with this from paragraph 16 of your affidavit. Will you tell the chairperson, please, what is it that is relevant to the question of state capture in regard to the matters you write?
Well, Chairperson, Mr. Montana was I first encountered Mr. Montana, in fact, at Intersight. He was the chairperson of the board of Intersight, and he was also the group CEO at Intersight. So, at PRASA. So effectively, when I joined, I got to meet Mr. Montana, and because he was the chairperson of the board of Intersight as well, I interacted extensively with Mr. Montana at the time. And in fact, when I was asked to leave Intersight to go to PRASA, Mr. Montana said to me, Martha, we have a need for a strong legal department for PRASA, so therefore, because of your background, I would suggest that we move you, it's still a group executive position, we move you from the CEO of Intersight to go and build the legal function at corporate, which I didn't see anything wrong with. I just knew that as an executive, you could be asked to do any work anywhere, and it was fine with me.
One of the intriguing issues is that you move from Intersight to PRASA at Mr. Montana's request.
That's correct, Chairperson.
But you'd had this ugly encounter with Mr. Montana relating to Strawberry Works. I'm just saying, explain how we, sitting outside, should understand that.
That's how it happened, Chair. Some of the things I'm afraid I can't explain, but yes, the encounter with Strawberry Works with Mr. Montana was a very, unpleasant one. Yes, indeed, he then asked me to go and lead the legal function. I couldn't refuse, Chairperson, so I agreed to then go across to the legal department. So as to, I guess one also, as far as Mr. Montana was concerned, my approach was we are working together. And I don't bear grudges and would not have taken that as an issue that I needed to, carry with me all the time. I accepted what happened and I moved on.
Now, would this move on your part at his request have been a promotion or not necessarily?
It was a lateral move.
It was a lateral move.
It was a lateral move, Chairperson.
Your salary and
It
other
stayed the
benefits
same.
remained the same. Okay.
And I suppose, just at a personal level, it was within a field for which you had been trained and studied.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, you then go to...
Well, maybe, Mrs. Sonia, I'm sorry. Would it be fair to look at his request to you to move to head the legal department? Would it be fair to look at that against the background of your what appears to have been a serious disagreement about the removal of the files, would it be fair to look at it as two professionals who accepted that they didn't agree on a certain issue, but otherwise their working relationship just continued on other matters?
Yes, correct, Chair. I just believed that that a lot of instances we didn't agree with Mr. Montana, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it was a task, in fact, that I was required to do, because the board of Intersight also had to agree to releasing me to go and work for PRASA's legal function. So it was just one of those things where you say we are professionals and we just need to do what is in the best interest of the organization.
Okay.
Then soon after you moved to the legal, to head the legal at PRASA, Mr. Montana asks you to do an important job. Will you tell the chairperson what that was?
Chairperson, in December, January 2014, December 2015, January, Mr. Montana took leave for 2 months. And he then approached me and requested me to act in his stead during that period of 2 months. So I was then able to, you know, take over the role of the acting group CEO whilst he was away. And that's what happened.
Well, I guess that following up on the question I asked earlier on, credit should be given both to you and him, that at least at that stage, whatever disagreements the two of you may have had, you were not, both of you were not allowing that to affect your working relationship.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Because now he was asking you to stand in for him, to be acting group CEO.
That's correct.
He wouldn't, I would imagine he wouldn't want to do that with somebody that he did not trust, or with somebody that he didn't think would be up to the job, and so on.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay.
Ms. Ngoye, you might remember much earlier in your evidence, you were talking about, or you were relating your role as head of legal in contracts that PRASA concludes and what advice you would give and so on. And you mentioned two matters at that stage, the Sufambo matter and the Prodigy matter.
That's correct, Chair.
Now, how did they become relevant to what happened soon after you assumed duties in around May 2015?
Chairperson, as I indicated, the issue around Sufambo was just not working where the legal function was concerned. We believed that the contract had far gone, and the advices that we were given were not really being listened to. You know, when we asked the questions to say we can't continue with this contract if these things have not been met, the conditions precedent have not been met, anybody would know that unless you meet the conditions precedent, the contract does not come into being. So when we asked these questions and we interrogated the contract, you know, we received a lot of pushback. We then wrote, Mr. Dingiswayo and myself, then wrote to Mr. Montana, effectively indicating that we will not be able to, you know, participate in the issue of Sufambo. When it came to Prodigy, Mr. Dingiswayo is the one that dealt with the Prodigy contract, and I work very closely with Mr. Dingiswayo, him being my direct report. And he had indicated to me that, look, this is the scenario and this is the email that I'm going to send to Mr. Montana and the team that had instructed us, you know, on the matter, because we didn't agree that there was proper processes that were followed. So we sent that email to Mr. Montana and the team that had instructed us, and, you know, we thought that we would be engaged accordingly about the advices that we had given, but we were not.
Well, let's just start off with the Sufambo matter. when you become head of legal at PRASA, that is now one of the matters on your table, I think.
Yes, it came to my table. It was the amendment, the intended amendment of the Sufamba contract, because the contract had already been concluded. So we were looking at amending the contract with the possibility of also increasing the value of the contract to 5 billion.
When you say we, who initiated that process of increasing the value of the contract?
It was a discussion that was happening within the organization, Chair. I understood that the instruction was coming from, Mr. Lucky Montana, and obviously he would need to have taken that instruction back to the board. So we understood as the legal function that that was the intention, that is where the organization was going, and the necessary approvals would be obtained to increase the value from 3.5 billion to 5 billion. So it's something that we understood.
And from the perspective of legal, was that going to create hurdles for PRASA, or problems for PRASA?
Well, it would have, Chair, having considered the contract and the issues that we had raised, with the contract itself. We were not comfortable. I mean, this matter was huge, 3.5 billion. For instance, the approval of National Treasury, we asked those questions. And the fact that those things were not being attended to, created a very serious problem for us, from a compliance perspective. And we just did not see this contract, being beneficial to PRASA. And when we raised our concerns, it was not received favorably.
So let's just have some detail. When you say we raised our concerns, who specifically and with whom, and thereafter, what were the nature of the concerns you raised?
Chairperson, Mr. Montana, as far as this particular contract was concerned, had sought the legal advice of a Ms. Brenda Malogete, who was a consultant at the time. And she had been the one that had, been running with the drafting of the contracts. So Mr. Dingiswayo and myself had had a number of meetings with Ms. Malogete, who was effectively the legal advice for PRASA. And when we raised the concerns, because the issues, when we read the contract, we wanted to know, we saw gaps in the contract. As an example, 3.5 billion is above the materiality, of PRASA, and in terms of legislation, we knew what needed to be done. And when we asked whether for instance, the necessary approvals were in place, she was not able to give us. We asked about the necessary approvals, in terms of Treasury, in terms of the DOT, and we wanted to see all those. And we also wanted to understand exactly what the board of PRASA had approved, because it wasn't clear at the time whether the board had approved the sale or the lease of the locomotives, and the number that was, branded at the time was between 70 and 80. So we needed clarity in terms of, those issues in the contract, and the material ones obviously being around compliance.
And you've read the judgment of Justice Francis and then Justice Lewis in the SCA. Are some of the issues that they decided in their respective judgments matters that you had raised?
Yes, Chair. I mean, the issues around the conditions precedent, yes, we did. And I guess at the time, Chair, when we were instructed to assist with the Sufamba contract, we didn't have a lot of information. I mean, some of the work that was picked up through the investigation was not things that were at our disposal. For instance, in terms of really pulling out the fact that, out of the number of guarantees that were required, we didn't even get all the number of guarantees that were there. But we saw this at face value. We're just asking questions, just to make sure that everything has been complied with.
Ngoye, can I just say, you talk about an investigation. You must please tell the chairperson what investigation you are talking about.
Chairperson, this is the forensic investigation that was conducted by the firm of attorneys Worksmans from the instructions of the board. So when they did their investigations and looked at these contracts, they were then able to find out that a lot more had been amiss.
So this is after Mr. Molefe's board had taken office.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And what was Mr. Montana's position at PRASA at that time?
Well, Mr. Montana left in 2015, so he was no longer there at the time that really this investigation process commenced.
But at the time you were raising, in 2015 now, you were raising questions, the investigation hadn't started, or had it started?
That's correct, Chair. It had not started.
So even before the investigations, you were raising questions in relation to the possible extension of the contract from 3.5 billion to 5 billion.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, the other contract that you mention in paragraph 19 is a contract relating to Prodigy.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, why would Prodigy be such an important player in PRASA?
Chairperson, we knew that, in fact, it was spoken of internally that whoever touches Prodigy, will not receive a favorable, response from Mr. Montana. We had been communicating with a lot of people internally, and they had indicated to us that this was Mr. Moodley's contract, and therefore we needed to do, what we're being instructed to do.
So Mr. Moodley you're talking about is...
Mr. Roy Moodley.
Then you refer then to an annexure, which is MN2 at page 317 of that bundle.
Yes, Chair.
If you could just summarize for the chairperson what the issue is that's raised.
May I? Sorry, Judge.
Before that, tell us who the email came from and to whom it was addressed and what the subject was that it was dealing with and the date, and then you summarize the issues dealt with.
Sorry, Mr. Chairperson. I understand my learned friend wants to
Yes.
raise a matter.
Thank you, Chair, and my learned friend for the indulgence.
Yes.
Chair, I just want to bring to the attention of yourself that we have not received these annexures and this part of the affidavit, Chair.
Is that so?
We have limited information to work with. May
Yes.
I ask for a short stand down, and if my learned friend can oblige me with a few copies, we can then proceed. It'll be very short.
Yes.
I can't follow because I don't have copies.
Yes.
If I'm indulged with the set, I could follow along.
Yes. No, that's fine.
Thank you,
Let
Chair.
Mr. Soni?
Mr. Chairperson, firstly, if that has happened, I must accept responsibility for that, and I apologize. It is, as you will know, done by a different department. I obviously would okay it, and I am sorry. But we will make available to my learned friend the relevant annexures that he wants.
What should happen is before anybody sends anything to anybody, the evidence leaders must okay that, to say, is this the right thing to send? Is everything that should be sent included? And so the evidence leaders must make sure that other people don't decide for them what is to be sent. The evidence leaders must identify what is to be sent. Other people can then collect and bring to the evidence leaders to say, these are the things we have identified. You check that they are fine, then they don't get sent until you say, this is okay, it can go. Okay, how much time should...
We won't
5
need
minutes,
more than
10
5
minutes?
Yes. About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. Okay, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes. Adjourn.
All rise.
1, 2, testing. Is it clear? No hiss, nothing. All right. So. It's happening. Thank you. Sorted. Thank you.
All rise.
Yes, let's proceed. Your mic is not on.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
We've made available to my learned friend the annexure in concern,
Yes.
in issue.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ngoye, could you please tell the chairperson what the gist of this document, well, as chairperson said, who sent it, what the gist is, and so on?
Chairperson, this email was from Mr. Lucky Montana. It was addressed to Ms. Untitled Chapter, who was effectively running with the Prodigy Contract at the time, Mr. Fani Dingiswayo, and Mr. Sidney Kuzwayo, who is in the SEM portfolio. I was copied, one of the people that was copied on the email.
And this email is marked MN2, is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay. What was the subject of the email?
Chair, the complaint, I saw this as a complaint from Mr. Montana.
Yes.
You know, effectively, it's about the My Station program, which involves Prodigy. And Chair, this was obviously done after, as the legal function, we had given that advice to say we believe that this contract is irregular and should not be continued with. He then writes this memo to us, effectively saying that there is nothing wrong with the appointment of Prodigy, nor the existence, the extension of their contract. You know, that in a nutshell, this email, Chairperson, effectively is Mr. Montana being outraged and believing that there are forces within PRASA that are working against him. You know, when you read the email, he says, this is a well-coordinated strategy that started in November 2014 when I went on leave. Now, this was a time that I was acting, you know, at the time. So I effectively thought, okay, this has got to do with me somehow, you know, in what work I did in his absence. And, you know, he says the extent of opportunism by some of our managers really amazes me. So you can see from the language that Mr. Montana has used in the email that he was ready to go to war with whoever was standing in his way as far as these matters were concerned, because he raises that there's a couple of contracts which are seen to be irregular and so on. And I understood at the time that he was referring to the work that we had done around Sufambo as well as now around Prodigy, that he believed that we were working against him.
Maybe the email might be sufficiently important to justify reading it. Maybe
Okay.
just read it. Before that, Ms. Nonhlanhla Ngoye
Ngoye
was part of the legal team?
No,
of the
Chair.
Legal department?
She's within HR, and this is where the contract was placed within the organization.
Oh, okay, all right. Just read the email in full and then you can comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he says, he addresses the email to Nonhlanhla. He says, there is nothing wrong with the appointment of Prodigy, nor the extension of their contract. I'm not surprised because this is part of a much bigger agenda, which has targeted certain contracts and appointments and to project these as being irregular. Some of the contracts had already been leaked to external auditors and the media as part of a strategy to discredit the group CEO and create a cloud before he steps down at the end of the year. He then goes on to say, this is a well-coordinated strategy that started in November 2014 when I went on leave. I will, at the most appropriate time, act against all those who are involved in this dirty campaign. The investigations they are starting is unlawful and part of a plot I am well aware of. The extent of opportunism by some of our managers really amazes me. A manager like Sidney Kuzwayo should start first by cleaning the many irregular appointments he has party to within SEM, which I have been trying to address and even explaining some of these to the Office of the Public Protector. Some of the managers are excited by the new board and are feeling all sorts of wrong information so that they could carry favor with the board. They will be the biggest losers at the end of this process. The decision to partner with Prodigy on the training of customer services remains sound, and the extension of the contract is still in order. Please allow them to continue with their strategy, which is bound to fail. Kind regards, Lucky Montana.
Yes, in the second paragraph, he refers to an investigation that he says is unlawful. What investigation was he talking about there?
I don't know, Chairperson. I wouldn't be able to say
Yes.
because I'm not aware of any investigation that was.
Yes, and he says that this well-coordinated strategy started in November 2014 when he was on leave. That was when you were standing in for him, is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay. Now, with regard to the Prodigy contract, there has been much evidence about it. Just remind me again what it was about, and to the extent that it talks about its extension, what actually the extension was.
Chairperson, the Prodigy contract was about, it was a training contract, effectively, where Prodigy would provide, training to the customer services unit within PRASA. So a number of employees within PRASA would be trained by Prodigy. So the contract had come to an end at a particular.
They would be trained to do what or to be what?
In relation to customer services, whatever, was within the customer services space. I don't have the details of the contract here. I don't want to surmise and say certain things. But what I know is that it was around training within customer services.
Yes.
And various employees of PRASA would then be able to go there, and the Prodigy would then be able to charge PRASA for services rendered in relation to that training. So it needed to be amended because we were increasing the scope further.
And when you say needed to be amended, is that the extension?
Yes, the contract itself.
Yeah.
We needed to then obviously include more scope of what Prodigy was supposed to do.
So the extension that he's talking about refers to an amendment of the contract to give it a wider scope.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay, all right.
Chairperson, just for your reassurance, Mr. Dingiswayo, who is going to be the next witness, will deal with this contract in more detail.
Yes, no, that's fine.
Now, this letter is sent to you, among others, you and Mr. Dingiswayo.
That's correct, Chairperson.
And in regard to the complaint that there's nothing wrong with the contract, this is Mr. Montana's complaint, what prompted him to raise that issue?
Well, I don't know, Chair. I think for me, because it was a known fact within the organization that you don't mess with the Prodigy contract. We knew it. I mean, we spoke as
You
colleagues.
don't what?
Mess
With the
or you
Prodigy
don't
contract.
interfere with it, and we knew of colleagues that had tried, to raise their objections to the Prodigy contract and how they were dealt with by Mr. Montana. So effectively, we knew that, what we were doing was probably going to land us into trouble. But it's our job. We had to do it.
Now, if you look at what you say towards the tail end of paragraph 19, you talk about the advice that Mr.
Paragraph
Dingus-
19 of her affidavit.
of 7.7, of SS7A, so 7B, sorry, Chair.
So, yeah, SS7B.
Yes.
Yes.
You say Mr. Dingiswayo's advice did not hold.
That's correct, Chair.
So just explain to the chair what the circumstances were. Mr. Dingiswayo will obviously come and give more details.
The instruction, Chair, was review the contract, the amendment, and okay it from a legal perspective, because there was nothing wrong with it, as far as Mr. Montana was concerned. But because we went after Mr. Dingiswayo looked at the agreement, and after discussing it with me, we both believed that we could not, support the extension of the contract, and advised accordingly. So when one says he did not accord with his instructions, it clearly means that, he was hoping that he would get the go-ahead from PRASA legal team, which did not happen.
Just to go back to Mr. Montana's email that we dealt with 1 minute ago, when he says in that email that there was nothing wrong with the Prodigy contract, as at that time, did you yourself know what the position was? And if so, was it your position that there was something wrong with that contract?
Chairperson, on reading the contract, because this issue of Prodigy, once again, was not a matter that went past the legal department. And which is some of the things that happened quite frequently within the organization. Some things come to us after they have been entered into. So it was one of those where, at the end of the day, when it came to us now for amendment, we asked for the entire file. We asked for the process that was followed, So those are the things that we requested Ms. Untitled Chapter to give to us so that we can then see whether there's regularity in the contract itself. And when those things were not forthcoming, we realized that this must be a problem. And we didn't want to be party to something, condoning something within the organization that did not follow process.
So is the answer that at the time of that email, your attitude was that there seemed to be something wrong with it, but you may not have been definite, you may not have been certain because you had not been given the contract or the whole file?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay.
Now, as a result of, or soon after the email was sent, what dramatic event happened?
Chairperson, the email was sent on the 18th of May, 2015. I then received a call from Mr. Dingiswayo to say, look, I've been called back to the office. This was around 7 o'clock on the eve of the 18th. Yes, it was the 18th. And that Mr. Montana wanted to see him. So Mr. Dingiswayo left home and went back to the office in Pretoria to have this meeting with Mr. Montana. What I then understood from Mr. Dingiswayo was that when he gave me the call after the meeting, he said to me, listen, I have been fired by Mr. Lucky Montana. And I found it very strange, and I asked, what is the reason? What did he say to you was the reason for dismissing you? And one of the allegations that Mr. Montana had made against, this is what Mr. Dingiswayo tells me, and he'll speak to that, Chair. He said to me that Mr. Montana thought that he was leaking information to the board, and he just didn't understand what that meant, because if anybody could possibly leak, and I don't know how you leak information to the board, would have been me, because I am the person that would then sit in some of the board committee meetings because of the role that I play within the organization. And, you know, it was just a very quick meeting, as I understand it, from Mr. Dingiswayo, that Mr. Montana said to him, look, he's clearly not working with him and he's working against him, and therefore he's fired.
And this followed the evening after, of the day he sent the email.
That's correct,
that you
Chairperson.
just read.
Yes.
When Mr. Dingiswayo told you this, what did you do?
I'm sorry, Ms.
As
Soni.
you please.
Can I take you back, Ms. Ngoye, to that email? What page was it again, Ms.?
It's page 317, Chair.
Oh, 317. Look at the last two sentences of paragraph 3 of that email. In those sentences, Mr. Montana says to Ms. Kondowe, some of the managers are excited by the new board and are feeding all sorts of wrong information so that they could curry favor with the board. They will be the biggest losers at the end of this process. How did you understand those two sentences?
Chairperson,
Or did they not attract your attention at the time?
no, they did.
Yeah, how did you understand them?
I understood it because, you know, when Mr. Montana went on leave, there was an issue around, you know, the property report that needed to have been presented to the board. Now, I was acting at the time, and obviously it would have been me who then communicated to the board to say we do not have this property report that Mr. Montana had promised the board. And I think he took exception to that. I mean, the way I understood it was he felt that he was betrayed at the time. But for me, it was an issue of saying, you know, do we have this thing or do we not have it? And I know definitely I am the one that then went back to the board to say, we don't have it. I had inquired. And so when I read this statement, and also in relation to the board, I knew very well that he was talking about me because there were issues that were raised in his absence that the board had raised with me and that I had to report on, which obviously I guess he didn't like what I had to then tell the board in his absence.
And do you know of any other managers that you think he was talking about in that sentence when he said some of the managers are excited by the new board and they are feeding all sorts of wrong information? One, I understand you to be saying you thought you were one of the people
Yes,
he was
correct.
talking about there, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Were
Chair.
there other managers that you thought he was talking about there?
I knew definitely that he was talking about Mr. Dingiswayo
Yes. And
because
why did you think he was talking about Mr. Dingiswayo?
because the subject matter of this email, Chairperson,
Yes.
talks to Prodigy. And Mr.
Yes.
Dingiswayo was the one that was dealing with the Prodigy matter.
Okay.
in the
Okay.
organization. So I definitely knew that somehow there was an attack on the legal function as far as the work that we've been doing.
Did you attach any meaning to the last sentence in that paragraph? They will be the biggest losers at the end of this process.
Yes, I did.
What did you understand that to mean?
I understood either that we were going to be, disciplined, for advice that we had given, but I understood it to mean that we were at the wrong end of the stick where Mr. Montana was concerned. And I guess, Chair, within PRASA, you did not want to be on the wrong end of the stick where Mr. Montana was concerned. And I knew we were in trouble.
What happened if you did?
Well, he took exception to it, Chairperson. I mean, the behavior within PRASA was that not a lot of people would challenge Mr. Montana on the things that he would say. I mean, if anything, I think I was probably one of those people within the organization that would challenge Mr. Montana if I didn't agree with things. And I found that, for me, it was a working relationship that we needed to have. But there was a sense of fear. I mean, I had some of my colleagues come to me to say, you have to be on the right side of Mr. Montana. You mustn't challenge Mr. Montana in the EXCO meetings that we have. And I just thought, but why are we here? Because we need to do things that are proper. And so that culture within the organization was there to say, you don't challenge Mr. Montana.
Then there is the second sentence in the second paragraph. I will at the most appropriate time act against all those who are involved in the state campaign. Did you have an idea of who he may have been talking about there?
I believed it was the legal department. I believe it was between Mr. Dingiswayo and myself. And
Yes.
Mr. Sidney Kuzwayo within the procurement space.
Yes.
Yeah.
And why did you think, even in that paragraph, he's still talking about you and Mr. Dingiswayo?
Because, Chairperson, it was immediately after the advice that we had given, which obviously just, annoyed Mr. Montana. It was just immediately after that he wrote this. And I knew, I even said to Mr. Dingiswayo, I said, you're not going to respond to this email. Leave it, because we are really being attacked here, and let's just see what is going to happen.
Yeah.
But to me, at the time, it was very clear that this email was intended
Yes.
for the legal department.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sonia, I interrupted you.
Mr. Speaker, may I take up a point that
Yes.
relating to the email? If you look at the second paragraph of that email, it has 3 sentences. The chairperson has dealt with the first 2. Can I ask you to look again at the 3rd sentence? It says the investigation they are starting is unlawful. What did you understand by that? Firstly, what investigation was he talking about?
Chair, I didn't know what he was talking to, because clearly at the end of the day, I knew I wasn't part of any investigations, that was involved or investigating Mr. Montana at the time. So I really didn't know what he was talking about.
But as you sit there now, after the lapse of time that has happened, are you able to relate this to any investigation that you later found out was happening at that time that he may have been talking about, or not really?
Not really, Chair. I couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at that stage, just for the sake of timeline, the appointment of Werksmans had not come into being.
That's correct, Chair.
And in regard to what you earlier called the investigations that had been started by the new board, those 2 had not started.
They had not started, Chair.
Then you say that, sorry, we're going back to now Mr. Dingiswayo being dismissed, and that's SS7B, paragraph 20. What did you do when Mr. Dingiswayo told you that he'd been dismissed?
Chairperson, immediately after speaking to Mr. Dingiswayo, I phoned Mr. Montana because I didn't understand why he would at least not speak to me as somebody that reports to him directly about somebody that reports to me. So I phoned him, Mr. Montana, and I said, look, I understand that you have just fired Mr. Dingiswayo. Do you care to tell me why? And his response to me was, look, I can't fire Mr. Dingiswayo. It's within my powers to do that. I said to him, look, I would have rather preferred that you speak to me about it, because in any event, whatever Mr. Dingiswayo gives to you from a strategic perspective would have been something that is sanctioned by me. I did not understand why it is that you felt the need to fire Mr. Dingiswayo. So I had that exchange with Mr. Montana on the phone. And one thing I did also say to Mr. Montana is that, you know what, Mr. Montana, you're taking me back to the times of Intersight, when you basically did the same thing with Martin Chauke. Why are you doing these things? You know, and he was rushing on the phone, you know. And I said to him, look, I'm the person that reports to you. Why is it that you cannot tell me what it is that you've got issues with? Because I would have thought that I would be the one that takes the rap if things go pear-shaped within the legal function. He wasn't willing to have that discussion, and he felt that I was challenging his authority. And at that time, I then said to him, well, can I have a meeting with you to discuss this thing? Because I clearly do not understand how it is that you can summarily dismiss an employee, and a key employee at that, within the organization. And we agreed to a meeting for the following day.
Before you get to that meeting, Ms. Ngoye, may I ask you?
Your voice has been lowered
I
again.
apologize, Chairperson.
Yeah.
May I ask you this? You received the email, you and the others received the email, and then you are told by Mr. Dingiswayo, I've been fired. Did you see a connection between the two?
Yes, I definitely did, Chair. I did. I saw the connection between that email and effectively what had been happening to, what had just happened to Mr. Dingiswayo.
And you said actually Mr. Dingiswayo's dismissal was on the same day as the email, is that right?
Effectively, yes. Because
yeah, but it was in the night, late in the
it was at night. He had to come back from home, Chairperson, and when he asked, is it really necessary, can you not wait for the following day? He was told, no, Mr. Montana wants to see you now.
Yes. Now, let's just go back. In terms of what Mr. Dingiswayo told you as the reason that was given to him by Mr. Montana, did you say Mr. Montana had said it was because he had leaked information? Or what reason did he say Mr. Montana had given?
He said to me the meeting did not even last 5 minutes. He said to me the one thing that Mr. Montana said was that, yes, he was leaking information to the board. And he was puzzled, you know, that he doesn't know how that comes about because he doesn't even deal with the board. You know. So that's what he told me. He said, look, it didn't last long.
Yes.
And he just told me that I'm working against him.
And when you had a telephone conversation with Mr. Montana, apart from saying that it was within his power to fire Mr. Dingiswayo, did he tell you the actual reason?
No, he didn't.
He did not at that stage, but you agreed to meet the following day?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
So let's go to that meeting. What happened the following day?
Chairperson, I had agreed to meet with Mr. Montana early in the morning, but the meeting only took place around about 6 in the evening. So I waited the whole day. I must also say that our meeting did not even last 5 minutes. As I walked in, you know, into his office, and in fact he was standing up at the time that he was talking to me. He said to me in vernac, he says, Martha, grand watel, meaning, you know, Martha, you are insolent, you know.
You are?
Insolent. So, and he said that, and he said, you are fired. So I then said, okay, Mr. Montana,
Was that the first thing he basically
Yes,
said at the start of the meeting?
yes, Chair. He didn't even sit down. He was standing up. And then that's what he said to me. And what I found is that perhaps he wanted to humiliate me also, at the time, because you had his PA there, that his door was open, and his legal advisor, Ms. Malini Naidu, was hanging around there. Ms. Kondowe was also there. But effectively, I was called in to be told that Giatella, I'm insolent and I'm fired. And I basically said, oh, that's fine. And I leave, and he said to me, you wait for your letter. I said to him, no, I'm not going to wait for my letter. In fact, I'll get my letter tomorrow when I come to pick up my things. And I left.
So, after the telephone discussion that you had had with him the previous evening, when you had phoned him to ask about Mr. Dingiswayo's dismissal, and the commencement of this meeting the following day at 6 p.m., had there been any discussion between the two of you on anything?
No, Chairperson. We hadn't spoken that day.
And the only thing that you had spoken to him about the previous evening when you called about Mr. Dingiswayo was why he had fired Mr. Dingiswayo?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, okay.
So this meeting, you say, didn't even last 5 minutes.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Now, he then gave you the dismissal letter, which you didn't wait for, but you picked up the next day. And that appears as Annexure MN3 at page 319. Would that be correct?
Maybe before we get to the letter,
Sorry.
you can go to it, but I want to ask you this question before Mr. Soni asks you the question about the letter. But get to the letter so that you have got the page.
Yes.
Okay. As at the time when Mr. Montana was telling you that you were fired and that you were insolent, what was your understanding of why you were being fired?
Is to, Chair, the fact that I questioned his decision, the fact that I challenged him about a decision that he made as the group CEO, which is something that, was never done really within PRASA, as I indicated earlier. He felt that I've really undermined the position that he was holding, and he was not going to have it.
So that's what was in your mind in terms of why you were being fired?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Continue, Mr. Soni.
Chairperson, but you've raised something that, may I pursue that as well?
Yes.
You had spoken to him the night before, after you were told that Mr. Dingiswayo had been fired.
That's correct, Chair.
Did he, at that meeting, indicate that the same fate probably awaited you?
No, he didn't. So I didn't know that I was going to be fired the following day.
And when you agreed, or when he agreed to the meeting on that evening, what did you understand would happen at the meeting?
Chair, I really understood. I thought that Mr. Montana and I would sit and thresh this issue out. I really believed that, I could make some sense of what he had done. I thought that we could sit and discuss it, because my intention really at the time was to say to him, no, look, don't act so rashly. I mean, this is what Mr. Dingiswayo did. We were trying to protect you as the group CEO. And that's what was in the opinion of Mr. Dingiswayo, to say, I believe that the group CEO is misled because processes were not followed. We are advising you, we are not working against you. That was the basis on which I thought I would engage Mr. Montana, and also say to him, no man, retract this dismissal. It was not intended, and also deal with the email. To say, what is it that you meant? Why did you mean these things? Because I believe that they are attributed to us. I wanted to talk to him. so that I could understand where his mind was. But he had decided, I guess, that he was going to fire me.
And at the time he informed you that you'd been dismissed, he didn't give you a reason except to say you were
Yes.
insolent.
That's correct, Chair.
Can we, on that note, then turn to Annexure MN3, SSA, page 319? And will you summarize for the chairperson what is contained in that letter?
Chair, the letter effectively contains the telephone call. He refers to the telephone call that I had made to him the previous night, and he was saying that I insisted on speaking to him even after he had said to me that he was in a meeting. And he said effectively in that letter that because I had dared him to fire me, I was really insolent and challenging his decision.
Now, sorry,
Yes.
is that correct?
Well, I did not dare him. I didn't dare him. I spoke to him. I spoke to him and I said to him, I am the person that you're supposed to be dealing with. Why don't you talk to me, about resources within my area? What is so difficult, And I guess he just didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that I could question his decision.
See, in the last sentence of the first page of MN3, if you could read that into the record, and then I'll just raise some of the issues I want in relation to what he says there. The one that's starting, be that as it may.
It says, be that as it may, in light of you daring me to request you to fire you, I, in my capacity as the Group CEO, view your daring as an act of repudiation of your employment, which I elect to accept.
So sorry, if you could stop. He is suggesting that the question of your dismissal was raised in the conversation the night before. Did that happen?
No, it didn't happen, Chairperson.
And then in the following page, he then asked you to put grievances in writing. Did you raise grievances with him?
No, I didn't, Chairperson. I guess for me, when I received this letter, it was a day, apart. And if he said I should put my grievances in writing, he had not said that to me anyway. I was just thinking, I'm not sure when would I have put these grievances to him. So it just didn't make sense to me that he put that in writing in his letter.
Of course, you did say that when you spoke to him on the evening on which Mr. Dingswa was fired, you did refer to what had happened to Mr. Chauke when you were at Intersite.
That's correct, Chair.
And in the context of saying, in effect, as I understand your evidence, Mr. Montana, you are now repeating what you had done before, is that right?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Okay.
Please, Chair. Then he says in the second last or third last paragraph, the level of insolence, so that's what he had said to you at the start of the meeting.
That's correct, Chair.
And then he says, you have repeatedly reminded me to terminate your employment, which you repeated at our brief meeting this evening. Did that happen firstly in the conversation and then that evening?
No, it didn't happen, Chair. As I say, I sat down, he stood up and said, Grand Watella, you are fired. And that was it. So I'm not sure when I would have, insisted that he fires me. I could barely say 2 words in that meeting with him.
Then he says the trust relationship has irretrievably broken down.
That's correct.
And he says your dismissal is effective immediately.
Yes. Yes, Chair.
Now, Pursuant to that, you and Mr. Dingiswayo were dismissed on successive days.
Yes, in fact, we received our letters on the same day. So Mr. Dingiswayo was dismissed on the 18th, I was dismissed on the 19th. On the 20th, when we came to collect our stuff, we received the letters which were dated the 20th.
That date is 20th May.
Yes.
You know, on page 320, below Mr. Montana's signature, in my eyes, that looks like 20/08, but can't be 08 because he had left
Yes.
by then, so it is 05.
Yes, yes, Chair.
Okay.
If I could just point out, Chairperson, it clearly does look like 8, but if you look at page 319, you will
Yes.
see the date it is received.
Yes,
Chairperson.
yes, thank you.
Okay, so you are dismissed by Mr. Montana. What happened next?
And maybe before that,
Yes.
he repeatedly says here in this letter of your dismissal that you basically asked to be dismissed.
Yes, Chair.
Did you not, in the course of some of the conversations you had with him, say anything that he could have interpreted as you asking to be dismissed, like, well, if you want to dismiss me, go ahead, or something like that?
No, Chair.
No?
Nothing.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, I'm very sure, Chair.
Yes. Okay.
And again, if I may just ask for emphasis, on the night before you were dismissed in your telephone call, the question of your dismissal simply did not arise.
I didn't, Chair.
Of course, you appreciate that when you say you didn't dare him to dismiss you or anything like that, as he says in this letter. So effectively, you are saying, well, he's fabricating that part of the letter.
That's correct, Chair. I'm
Yes.
saying it, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Again, just putting it in context, at this time, Mr. Molefe's board was the accounting authority at PRASA, would that be right?
That's correct, Chair.
What did you do to protect your interests after you were dismissed? You and Mr. Dingiswayo.
Chairperson, the first thing that we did, we approached the CCMA. And, obviously as an unfair labor practice, your summary dismissal, no process. So we went to the CCMA to lodge a complaint. And after that, we then wrote to the board, and basically advising the board what had transpired and putting it to the attention of the board to say we don't understand the basis on which we could be fired, and also the fact that it was a summary dismissal without any procedure. I think for me, what baffled me was that we were the legal advisors of the organization, and this is how we are dealt with, and we raised the risks associated with Mr. Montana's approach in dealing with us. And yeah, we flagged it with the board and requested their intervention.
And what happened pursuant to that?
I understand, Chair, that Mr. Montana was then advised by the board. In fact, when he was asked to explain the reasons for dismissing us, he said we had committed gross misconduct. And so what I understood had happened is that then the board said, no, that's fine. You need to follow procedure. If they have committed gross misconduct, discipline them. We are not saying you shouldn't, but at the end of the day, proper processes must be followed. And effectively what then happened is that he then retracted the dismissal letter and requested that we come back to work.
So this is Mr. Montana himself.
That's correct, Chair.
How long after the dismissal did
It was
the
about a
retraction
week.
happen?
It was about a week, Chair.
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Before the retraction happened, had you had the occasion to write to him to deny some of the things that you say he said in his letter of your dismissal that were not true?
No, Chair, I didn't do it, no.
Okay.
Did you refer to it in your CCMA application, that letter in which he alleged that you had dared him to dismiss you?
I think we made reference to it, Chair. I can't actually recall if we attached it, but we did say it was following this particular.
Right, so he now, how does he communicate to you the retraction of the dismissal?
We received a telephone call from one of the HR managers, who then, effectively said to us, look, your dismissal has been retracted. You need to come and report to work, and I guess we just did that.
Now, when you were told your dismissal has been retracted, what did you understand would happen next?
I understood that because the dismissal had been retracted, perhaps Mr. Montana had, reconsidered the decisions that he had made, and that we would be coming back to work.
In fact, that's what you'd been told. You
Yes.
must come back to work.
Yes.
What happened when you got back to work?
We got back to work, Chairperson, and we were denied access to the system. In fact, as we got back, we were told then to give reasons why we should not be suspended. And it was to happen within 24 hours, And I then requested an extension to say, I don't have a laptop. I would need to go and find some place to work for and put this thing together because I don't have access to my equipment. It was rejected. So effectively, we sat down, and it was Mr. Dingiswayo and I. He did his letter, I did mine. And I guess the approach that we took at the time was that Mr. Montana did not have authority to suspend us because he was functus, and we said, you can't, this is the same issue. You've withdrawn the dismissal, now you want to suspend us. We said, you're functus officio. And he took exception to that.
Chairperson, I see it's 1 o'clock, but I have one more question, if I can. It's
Yes.
just related to this. And
Yeah.
the question that Mr. Montana says to you the dismissals are, or you are told the dismissals are retracted. Then you say Mr. Montana suspended you. Why do you say it was he? How was that communication made to you?
Again, he sent a manager within HR to come and give us the letters that said to us, we must give reasons why we should not be suspended. And he advised that that instruction comes from Mr. Montana.
And who signed those letters?
Mr. Montana signed the letters.
Chairperson, would this be an appropriate time?
Yes. Okay. We'll take the lunch adjournment. We'll resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
All rise.